Is the Premier League about to launch its own broadcast channel and break away from its current partners? If it did, what impact would that have on the league, on its shareholders, and on you, the consumer? Are the rumours true, or does the league just want to drum up more interest in its broadcasting rights and drive the price up? I'm Neil Wood, and this is Football Finance Professionals, the channel that's dedicated to teaching you about finance through the medium of football. If you like the video, hit like. And if you want some more content, make sure you hit the subscribe button. And if you want to hear more about the Premier League broadcasting deals and how it would look if it was to set up its own broadcasting company, stay tuned. The present Premier League broadcasting deal was unanimously agreed by Premier League clubs and runs between the seasons 22-23 all the way through to 24-25. So the present deal still has 2 years left to run. But the Premier League historically has been excellent at negotiating these deals well in advance of when they fall due. So it wouldn't surprise me if the Premier League was about to start negotiations with its broadcasting partners, which include Sky Sports, BT and Amazon, and trying to get more on board to sell its UK and overseas broadcasting rights. And that would be for the next cycle, beyond the current deal. If we look back at the history of the growth of the Premier League broadcasting rights, all the way back to 1992, at the point of inception of the Premier League. The first deal was worth just over £300 million with Sky B. That was a 5-year deal for just domestic rights. The current deal that's running between 22-23 and 24-25 is thought to be worth over £5 billion for just a 3-year cycle. And that's just comparing domestic with domestic rights. The figures that we've just quoted do not include overseas rights, and in the present cycle these are thought to be worth, again, well in excess of £5 billion and slightly more than the domestic rights. If you think about the domestic products, it's just the UK market, whereas the rest of the world is much bigger than that, both in population and the number of countries. So it's not surprising that the Premier League, which is a global product and very attractive across multiple markets, can now attract more income from overseas jurisdictions and partners. So in total, it's thought that the 3-year broadcasting cycle for the Premier League will bring in excess of £10 billion, over £3 billion each season. Historically, the Premier League has been excellent at negotiating these deals. Back in the 2013-16 cycle, we saw a new entrant into the market, and that was BT Sport, competing with Sky Sports. And that saw a 70% increase in the broadcasting rights in one cycle alone. In the cycle thereafter, 2016-19, another approximately 70% increase on the previous deal. What does this tell us? The Premier League is central to a broadcasting package for these broadcasters. These broadcasters do not just show the Premier League. They have other football products and other sports, but the Premier League is very valuable to all of these broadcasters, which now include Sky, BT and Amazon. There's rumours for the next cycle that Disney Plus and DAZN want to get involved in the bidding process. But as a consumer, if you wanted to consume all of the live TV showings of Premier League games in the UK, you would need 3 subscriptions that would cost you over £100 per month. But what are the alternatives to the current setup? As we've just mentioned, both Disney Plus and DAZN look to be interested in taking some or potentially even all of the rights off other parties. And it's likely that interested parties will be expressing that interest to the Premier League. What's really interesting is it's been reported recently that the Premier League is considering setting up its own broadcasting channel to stream and show its live games across its own network. And that is a significant potential change. But what would be the point in the Premier League doing this? And would it be worth it for the league, its shareholders being the clubs? And what would some of the hurdles be for the Premier League to be able to jump over in order to be able to achieve this ambition, if it's true? As we know with any subscription service, whether that's Sky, Amazon, BT, or even a free one such as YouTube, subscribers will increase and decrease. They'll fluctuate over time. That could depend on external factors such as the economy, potential alternatives, the consumer's interest, or a whole host of other factors. But let's assume the Premier League does go ahead with its plan or rumoured plan to set up as its own broadcasting channel. And let's walk through some theoretical figures. Let's assume there's 5 million UK subscribers, which would represent the equivalent of the UK or domestic broadcasting rights for the Premier League. In order to achieve that 5 billion figure across a 3-year period, the Premier League would need to generate £1,000 from each subscriber each 3-year period, which is an equivalent of £28 per month. If the Premier League could achieve 10 million subscribers in the UK market, which again could be achievable, the number would halve. So they would need to generate £500 per 3-year cycle from each subscriber, and that equates to about £14 per month. However, that's not the end of the story. What the Premier League is currently selling in exchange for £5 billion for its UK or domestic broadcasting rights is intellectual property. The right for somebody else to sell their products. But with those rights comes significant cost. Cost of filming, cost of production, transport costs, commentators, pundits. And the Premier League doesn't have any of that. What the Premier League receives is cash and outsources all of that production cost. And it's up to the broadcasters to leverage their own networks and their own production staff and their own setups to be able to record, produce, edit, and output the products onto their own channels. So we're not comparing like with like. What the Premier League receives from its broadcasting partners could be deemed to be broadcasting profit, and that's a return on its intellectual property. The Premier League is not a broadcaster. It's a governing body acting on behalf of the Football Association, and it governs the most prestigious league in English football. Therefore, if there was a desire to set up a broadcasting arm of the Premier League, this would lead to significant costs being incurred. And these costs would need to be considered carefully because the Premier League is not a full-time role. As a full-time broadcaster, you can share resources between different types of production activities. Cameramen may be outsourced or freelance cameramen, as could the whole crew be, as could the whole production team. But if these people had the choice of working every Saturday afternoon to film a game and for nobody else, then would that be sufficient to pay their wages? But would the staff on the ground that are effectively the engine room of the broadcasting channels be more comfortable working for a broadcaster that has alternatives? Those alternatives could be film production or drama. It could be anything beyond sport. It could even be other sports beyond the Premier League. So the Premier League would need to consider this if it was going to set up its own broadcasting channel. The alternative to that is that the Premier League could provide this service to others, and others could be the clubs. The clubs could be provided with production facilities or production staff to be able to record Netflix-style documentaries, such as All or Nothing, on behalf of the league itself, using the league's newly formed infrastructure and staffing network. So if the Premier League were to go ahead with this, it would need to consider all of these different factors, both from a cost and a practicality point of view. One way that it would make it more feasible financially for the Premier League to be able to set up its own broadcasting channel is to include these overseas rights. And the overseas deals run at present beyond those of the UK domestic deals. So the Premier League would need to consider that when looking to exit any of those deals. But if the overseas market was an option, then the whole world's population that's interested in the Premier League now becomes the population that is being targeted for this new product. At that point, the estimate in the number of subscribers could significantly increase from the 5 or 10 million in the UK market up to potentially, let's say, 200 million globally. And if those 200 million subscribers were to pay £10 per month, which is less than 10% of what the UK market is currently paying, then the revenue generated by the Premier League for the distribution of its live games would be £24 billion per year. Now that far outstrips the profit as we need to see it of £3 billion per season that's being distributed from the broadcaster. Now, if this were the scenario, with the UK and domestic rights being combined at no real additional cost of production at least, because the games would still be played, would still be filmed, would still be commentated upon, would still be edited and produced, then the cost of that production could be up to £20 billion a season, which it wouldn't be, but it would still be worthwhile to get an increase of £1 billion per season if that were to be the case. But the Premier League would need to be confident in these figures. Would 200 million people globally pay £10 a month in order to be able to access live Premier League games? And what would the barriers be to some of those subscriptions? In the UK, the 3 p.m. blackout rule would be a hurdle. Because if the Premier League were to go to the effort of filming all of its games, the best product that would give all Premier League club fans globally the access to live games would be to be able to view those games as they're being played. It wouldn't necessarily be a problem in overseas jurisdictions, but in the UK specifically, UEFA's Article 48 restricts live games at certain times. Those specific times in the UK have been chosen to be 2:45 p.m. to 5:15 p.m, which is a 2.5-hour window where no live games can be broadcast on UK television. What this has led to, and partially because of the increasing costs of subscriptions from Sky, BT and Amazon, is illegal streaming of Premier League games, which is a much cheaper alternative to even a Premier League subscription at £10 per month. And although it's illegal, some consumers may take the risk of being able to access all Premier League games and everything else that they want to watch. And they wouldn't necessarily be willing to pay that additional £10 a month just to watch the legal version of the Premier League games in the UK. But why was the 3 p.m. blackout rule introduced? In the UK, the 3 p.m. blackout rule has been introduced to protect attendances at lower league clubs, which do not have the broadcasting deals and the broadcasting revenues to prop up their finances, but they're much more reliant upon matchday revenues. Local towns, small populations that rely on those people that want to watch live football but are dedicated to doing so in person. Given the fact that the 3 p.m. blackout rule applies only on a Saturday, would an Oldham fan choose to watch an Oldham game in person at 3 p.m, or alternatively watch a Manchester United game on TV? Potentially that's a bad example. That's the theory. Lower league teams could suffer in terms of their population of attendees, because part of that population may choose not to go to the game. And would these lower league clubs lose out on their general admission, hospitality or season tickets from their local fans if they choose not to attend the games in person and would rather watch what may be seen to be a higher quality product on TV live on Saturday at 3 p.m? Ultimately, the 3 p.m. blackout rule, and whether the Premier League decides to set up its own broadcasting channel or whether that's potentially just a ploy to generate more income, is down to one thing, and that's finances. Whether that's protecting the finances of the lower league clubs, whether that's generating more revenue on the back of a rumour by generating more interest from other parties or existing parties, or potentially even going all the way and the Premier League becoming its own broadcaster, which could have a dramatic impact on the distribution of funds to Premier League clubs. Because let's face it, the Premier League would not spend £20 billion a year setting up its own broadcasting company and filming its own games. There could be huge potential upside for the Premier League and its members, but it would be a massive shift from the relationships with Sky, BT, and more recently with Amazon. One other challenge that the Premier League would have to get over, especially if it was going into the overseas markets, is a financial consideration, and it's a tax one. Presently, the Premier League will sell its intellectual property to broadcasters, whereas if it was to sell directly to consumers in multiple jurisdictions, that would be classified as a digital service, and the VAT rules around digital services are very complex and would differ from jurisdiction to jurisdiction, and the VAT or equivalent charges and compliance costs would be dictated to at the point of consumption rather than the point of production. So let's take an example. If a Spanish consumer wanted to subscribe to a Premier League subscription model, it would be Spanish tax law that would dictate the amount of tax that should be charged on that subscription, and the Premier League would then be on the hook for a VAT return in Spain. Now, since Spain is in the EU, that's simplified somewhat, but it would apply in theory to every single country outside of the EU and outside of the UK as separate jurisdictions. This isn't insurmountable, and there are service providers that can help and assist with this type of setup. So it shouldn't be something that should put the Premier League off, but it's definitely something that should be considered by the league. Another factor is the Champions League and the subscription service that is linked to that. Because if consumers were to move away from BT Sport or from Sky Sports, who would have the rights to the Champions League? Could the Premier League set up, offer its services to UEFA and sell UEFA competitions on its behalf? Would UEFA even entertain that? Or would UEFA potentially set up their own broadcasting company? But what we might end up with is a Premier League only subscription model and then potentially a BT Sport or Champions League subscription as well. So the headline subscription figure of £10 a month for Premier League football would be exactly that, but fans tend to want to watch their own team on the European stage as well. The flip side to that consideration is, would these broadcasting companies survive, or at least their sports arms survive, without the Premier League? So would BT Sport or Sky exist if the Premier League rights were taken away from them? Similarly to football stadia, the broadcasting arm would need to be utilised on a full-time basis in order to be able to generate as much revenue as possible. So the Premier League would need to consider that, as we mentioned earlier in the video. How could they do that? Well, we could see more women's games being televised and being filmed and produced by the Premier League, although they are separate to the Women's Super League. The resources could be shared across football. Academy games could be filmed, produced and shown on TV. Or we could see behind-the-scenes documentaries where the production is outsourced to the clubs itself. So let's see where we end up when it comes to the next cycle of the Premier League. What do you think? Will the Premier League continue its relationships with current and potential new broadcasters, or will they roll the dice, cut those relationships and go solo? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. If you like the video, hit like. And if you want more information on how to learn about finance through the medium of football, visit www.footballfinancepro.com for more information. My name's Neil Wood and I'm a football finance professional.